Okay, so we were talking here about Berkeley, and I told you a little bit at the beginning of our live stream about Berkeley himself. Here we go. About his life and about his philosophy. And it's important that Berkeley comes after Locke, and he was also very much influenced by Locke. He thought that Locke's philosophy is in principle what he wanted to do, and it is in principle, the right way to go about it, but that Locke got some very fundamental questions wrong. And so Berkeley wants to fix the problems with Locke's philosophy. And much of what he's trying to do you can understand better if you realize that he is a man of God, right? He was a bishop, and he lived from 1685 to 1753, so around the 1700s, half century before and after. And he was a bishop. He derived inspiration from Locke, and Locke himself had derived much of his inspiration from physics and from Newton and from Galileo, from astronomy, right? All these sciences, as most of the people in the time we were speaking about, right? Leibniz also had been influenced by the microscope and by atomic theory, and particularly Locke, who thought that the mind operates in a way like physics, where these ideas come into the mind and then they combine according to physical laws to create our understanding of the world. And so all of them were very much influenced by physics and wanted to make philosophy be almost like physics, as good as physics. But there's a problem with Berkeley, right? Because he is a man of God. And the problem with physics is, it started with Newton, went on with Galileo and Kepler and Copernicus. And the problem with the physicists and with the physical view of reality is that at some point it becomes unclear what God is doing. Because if the physical universe works according to physical laws, then where is the role of God to influence this physical world? Because, every consequence of an action happens because of what happened before, because of some causes. And then you ask, okay, where did the causes come from? They came because of some other causes that are also physical. And so the physical world is closed causally, right? And if this is the case, then what is God even doing, right? What can God do? And this was the problem for many of these philosophers. And so Spinoza was a determinist. He said everything is determined, so God is not even, interacting with the world. And Leibniz said the same, right? The world is closed. The monads don't have windows. They cannot even communicate. God exists. For Leibniz, he has pre-programmed everything. But after programming the world, after putting it in motion, he went away. And so now he's not doing anything. And this was not good enough for a bishop, right? Because the whole point of being a priest is that you are a sort of middleman between the world of the believers and God, right? A priest is in there. And what a priest does most of the time, is praying. And what good is the praying if God is not listening? If the world is pre-programmed and just working like a clockwork, like Leibniz says, there is no use for prayer. Prayer is a kind of communication. It's a two-way communication. And it only makes sense if there is somebody listening to your prayer. And the same with all these sacraments, with marriage and baptism and all these things only make sense if God is actually there doing something, participating in the world. And so Berkeley is unhappy about a state of affairs in which physics pushes the importance of God away, and so he tries to restore, in a way, the position of God in this system of physics. And this is something that you have to keep in mind, this is why Berkeley's theory is as it is, right? You have to keep in mind it's a religious theory, essentially. It's trying to reinstate God's role in the universe after it had been threatened by the mechanistic view of the world that is there not only with empiricists but also with rationalists, Spinoza and Leibniz, but also Locke. They all have very little for God to do, right? And Berkeley wants to change this. And Berkeley wrote his book, which we will see some of that. We will read the treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge in 1710 at 25, right? This is amazing what people were doing at this age. If you think of it if you're 25 today, then you have probably just finished university and you have not yet done anything in your life. Berkeley had already written his main book. Spinoza died at 43 or something like that, and had already also finished all his books by then, multiple books. So Berkeley started, he went, all over the place from England to the Americas and then back. In the Americas, he started, in North America, he started a school for American Indians, what they then called Indians, right, the indigenous Americans, which failed because of financing problems. He settled in Rhode Island, was interested in medicine, made medical experiments, returned to England, became a bishop for 18 years and died in Oxford. And Berkeley is also interesting because he has this unique place in the debates we have been looking at, because normally you have rationalists who believe in a mind substance of some sort, like Descartes, Spinoza, or Leibniz, and you have empiricists who believe in matter and the possibility of knowledge through the senses, like Locke. And Berkeley is an empiricist, but he believes that if we're serious about empiricism, about learning from our experience, then we will see that our senses clearly show us that matter does not exist. So matter is an illusion, but it is an illusion that we can uncover by looking at our senses, right? Which is a crazy idea that my senses will prove to me that matter does not exist. And this is why it's interesting, right? This is why his theory is interesting. So he's an idealist. He thinks that only ideas exist, but we can verify this by looking carefully at our senses. So Berkeley starts with Locke because Locke is also an empiricist. He is the first, big empiricist we know about. Berkeley starts with Locke, but he thinks that Locke is not consequent enough. If one correctly understood and followed Locke's ideas, one would end up denying the existence of matter entirely. We talked a little bit about the basic problem Berkeley had, right, with God and the role of God. And so now perhaps we can go and have a look at Berkeley's book. Yeah, one thing you see here when we look at the book, this is a Project Gutenberg book. I just wanted to point this out to you, that this Project Gutenberg is a project where they digitize classic books that are out of copyright, and it's only one of them. There are many different editions of not only Berkeley, but Locke and Hume and Descartes and so on. You find everything online for free. Spinoza. So I really think you should not go and buy these books, because there is no point in buying them, physically. Usually you will not even read them. I don't expect that anyone reads these people for fun. You don't read the whole book from front to back. If you want to learn philosophy, it's better to read a secondary book, secondary literature about these philosophers where they are explained. You can normally not understand them well directly if you don't know the context, right, in which they write. And obviously, if you're beginning, if you're not a professional philosopher, you don't have this context. So reading them directly, it will be misleading even. It will not even give you anything. And it would be much better to get a good secondary book which explains these philosophers in their historical context. And also, buying the sources can be very expensive. There's a lot that these people have written. If you take all the works of Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz and Locke and Hume and now even Berkeley, then you end up with, dozens of books. And even if you do it for the ancients, Plato fills a whole bookshelf by himself. So you would need a lot of space. You would spend a lot of money, and in the end, you would probably not even read these books very often. So I always say, read them online. They are free online. Don't even buy them on Amazon or anything. Just go to Gutenberg.org, is the Project Gutenberg. You will find all the text. Ancient Greek books, there are other libraries, Perseus and other libraries. You can just say any book on Google and then add full text, and then you will get like this here, a copy of the full text of the book. And this is perfectly legal, right? Because these books are not copyrighted anymore. Berkeley is dead for 350 years. All his descendants are. So there is nobody to harm there. There's nobody who has the copyright. And if you buy it from a publisher, the only thing you're doing is giving money to some publisher who himself, he has gotten the book for free, right? Is now reselling it to you for good money. So you can just get the free copy, and either, if you really want it printed, send it to a laser printer, print it yourself and bind it in a copy shop. Or if you really want a printed edition, of course, go get one. But generally, I prefer to put these things on my phone and read them there. And you can even copy the text, which is what I did here. I took it from Project Gutenberg and I copied it into a Google document. So what you see here is a Google document. This allows you to also adjust the fonts a little better. You can make it bigger and smaller and more pleasant to read on a phone, right? Or you want smaller margins and bigger fonts for a phone than you would have on a printed page. And you can do everything yourself by downloading the book there, the text, just copy it and paste it into a Google document. Okay. So let's continue with this now. Let's have a look at what Berkeley is actually saying. And he has lots of stuff he's talking about, but we don't need all of that. So of course, we cannot read the whole book. We'll just have a look at some of the main ideas of generalizing. So he starts there, and it's a good point to start there because this is an easy point to understand. And Berkeley is very clever to start at this point because he can make his whole argument, he can make his whole point actually with this one example. And this is very easy, very tangible. You can immediately understand what he's talking about. But from there, he will then expand this idea and talk about all these other things, about the role of God and metaphysics and epistemology and so on. But he will do it beginning with a point that's very easy to grasp. And this is generalization. And Locke is saying that when we have an abstract idea, what happens with abstract ideas, for example, when I say bottle, right? When I say bottle, in general, in abstract, Locke says, don't think of this bottle, right? Because this is not general bottle. This is, in fact, a quite special bottle because it's metal and blue, and normally bottles are made of glass and they are not blue. They are transparent, or if they're beer bottles, perhaps they're brown or green. So what happens is when I have bottle as a general word, Locke thinks we have all these images of bottles, of different bottles we have seen throughout our lives, and we kind of put them on top of each other. You can imagine, like in Photoshop, you put all these images on top of each other, make them half transparent, and then you see what is common in all these images. And what is common, you call it bottle. This is how you recognize a bottle. And what is specific to individual bottles, what is not lining up on this superimposed image, right, where the images are on top of each other, what is special to each image will in the end just be, fuzzy at the edges and disappear. It will not be important, while the core of the picture where the things overlap, the common parts of these many pictures of bottles, will constitute what you think of as bottle in the abstract. And so there are some features of all bottles. They have a neck, they have a wider part where the liquid goes. They're filled with liquid. They normally have some kind of cap. And this also has these features, only in a particular way, right? This is a metal cap. Other bottles may have a plastic one or a cork, and here it has a neck. This is wider than a normal bottle, but the body is shorter than a normal bottle, and it's blue and metal and so on, which is different from other bottles. But we recognize it as a bottle because it has these common features too, right? And this is what Locke is saying. And so he says, when I say bottle, the word bottle is a word that is a sign of an abstract idea. And the abstract idea is this idea of bottle in the abstract. And now this is where Berkeley starts his attack, right? He says, this is wrong. And why is this wrong? Let's read it. Again, the mind, having observed that in the particular extensions perceived by sense, there is something common and alike in all, and some other things are peculiar, as this or that figure or magnitude, which distinguish them from one another. It considers apart or singles out by itself that which is common, making thereof a most abstract idea of extension, which is neither line, surface, nor solid. So now he talks of extension, but you can make the same argument with bottles, right? So we generalize, we take the things that are common to all bottles, and that which is common you make into a most abstract idea of, let's say, bottle, which is neither this bottle nor that bottle, but it is bottle in general. So likewise the mind, we're now around half down the page here, by leaving out the particular colors perceived by sense and retaining that only what is common to all, makes an idea of color in abstract, which is neither red nor blue nor white nor any other determinate color, but it is a color in general. And the same happens with shapes and figures and space and so on. So this is how Locke thinks about it. It's not what Berkeley thinks. Berkeley is now first explaining what Locke is thinking in order to show later that it is wrong. And you can already see why it is wrong, right? Because if I tell you now, when I say bottle, what do you see in your mind? Do you see really an abstract bottle? And even worse, when I tell you color, like he says, do you see an abstract color that is not red or yellow or blue or green, but it's just color? Try to imagine just color for a moment. And you see that you cannot do it, right? There is not just color. Your mind cannot imagine just color. You always see a particular color. And when I say bottle, you always see a particular bottle. And perhaps many particular bottles. Perhaps you have a sequence playing in your mind, or you see a collection of bottles on a table, but they are all particular bottles. You cannot see an abstract bottle with your mind, right? And this is how Berkeley starts attacking Locke. And now he says, for example, the mind having observed, this is before the page starts here now, out of the complex or compounded idea, the mind has observed Peter, James, and John. They resemble each other. And out of this complex idea, it takes away what is peculiar to each, retaining only what is common to all, and so makes an abstract idea wherein all the particulars equally partake, abstracting entirely from and cutting off all those circumstances and differences which might determine it to any particular existence. And so we get the abstract idea of man, which is not a particular man, and then he says it doesn't have a particular color or size or, shape of the body, but it's a most general man. And again, this is supposed to show you how crazy this idea is, right? Or an animal. He gives the example of an animal, right? He says, try to think of an animal that is just abstractly an animal. It is not walking, flying, creeping. It is not furry or not furry. It doesn't have scales. It doesn't have a particular way of having a snout or legs. But try to imagine an abstract animal that is totally abstract. And he says this you cannot do, right? There is no way how we can imagine an abstract animal. And so this is, we cannot do that. And so now he says whether others have, so let me go back here a little bit. Here we go. Whether others have this wonderful faculty of abstracting their ideas, they best can tell. For myself, I find indeed I have a faculty of imagining or presenting to myself the ideas of those particular things I have perceived, and variously compounding and dividing them. I can imagine a man with two heads, or the upper parts of a man joined to the body of a horse. I can consider the hand, the eye, the nose, each by itself, abstracted or separated from the rest of the body. But then, whatever hand or eye I imagine, I must have some particular shape or color. It must have some particular shape or color. So likewise, the idea of a man that I frame to myself must either be a white or black, straight, crook, tail, low, middle-sized man. I cannot, by any effort of thought, have the idea above described, of a man in general who is not any of these particular things. And so this is easy to do yourself as an experiment, right? Everybody can do this. Try to think of something abstract. You will see that you are thinking of something particular. And this proves that Locke is wrong. Abstract words are not the sign of abstract ideas. Abstract words are, Berkeley says, the sign of collections of ideas. So when I say bottle, I have in my mind a bag of bottles that are all different, and I see them all perhaps arranged on a table or in a sequence, a flash across my mind, but in some way I see a collection of particular bottles and understand that bottle means all the members of the collection and what is common to them. But I don't actually see a bottle. And this is now important because in this way now, I don't see an abstract bottle. In this way now, he undermines this connection between my ideas and the outside world and the way how I form my ideas. Because Locke said there is this outside world that gives us the ideas, and I know it's there because it gives me these ideas. I don't know particularly what is there in the outside world. There is something, he says, I know not what, but I know that there is something because it gives me this idea. And Berkeley now has already established that Locke is wrong because Locke is not looking closely enough. If you look carefully enough, then you'll see that actually the way Locke describes our perception is wrong. We don't have abstract ideas in the way he says. And actually we don't have knowledge about what's happening outside. And because we don't have knowledge about anything that happens outside, this outside world is just a kind of unjustified belief. It's not something I should believe in, right? And here he talks specifically about Locke, a late, deservedly esteemed philosopher. This is supposed to mean Locke. And later he's always talking specifically about Locke. So Locke says words become general by being made the signs of general ideas, right? We mentioned this already. And Berkeley does not think that this is the case. And he gives more and more examples of the same thing, right? For example, does it not require some pains and skill to form the general idea of a triangle, which is none of the more abstract, comprehensive, and difficult, for it must be neither oblique nor rectangle, neither equilateral, equicrural, whatever this means, but all of these at once. So, you have different triangles, but when you say triangle, you don't want to think of a particular, you want to think of all the triangles at once. And this is obviously impossible. And if a man pretends or has the faculty of framing in his mind such an idea of triangle as I described here, so a triangle that is not this and not that, but is a general triangle, it is vain to pretend to dispute him out of it, nor would I go about it, but I, Berkeley, cannot do that. So my experience is not like that. Yeah, and here summarizes it, whereas in truth, there is no such thing as one precise and definite signification annexed to any general name. They are all signifying indifferently a great number of particular ideas. So there is the abstract word is not made the sign of an abstract idea, but the abstract word is a sign for a collection of a great number of particular ideas. He does also something here about the ends of language. He's talking about what is the purpose of language, right? So the ends in the sense of the purpose of language. And he says that language is not only for communicating. And this is interesting because this is what we naively would think, right? When you say, what is language doing in the animal kingdom, right? We would say it's communicating, right? The dolphins communicate, the monkeys communicate, the dogs communicate, we communicate. And language is there to essentially pass propositions, right, between us, true propositions, facts, inform us about facts. And this is how Aristotle also saw language, right? Aristotle was saying that statements have a truth value, they can be true or false, and then there's all this logic about how we can understand the more complex truth values of multiple statements when we put them together with logical operators, and we can make truth tables, and we can create formal logic, essentially, which is about propositions that can be true or false. But Berkeley, he is already starting something that becomes much later a trend, and Hume continues it, which is this idea that perhaps the way we are psychologically made up, and Hume does this very much, right, causes us to have particular beliefs that are not true or false in an objective sense, but they just express the way that we are made, biologically or psychologically. And Hume will do it later with causality, right? Hume says, when let's say I push a ball off the table, I don't actually see the causality. I see me moving my hand, and I see the ball rolling off the table, and I see one moment where they're very close together, but I never see actually the transfer of force, the transfer of momentum, right? These are things I cannot see. So if I am an empiricist, they don't actually exist because only what I can see exists, right? And therefore they are meaningless words, right? If I say causality, it doesn't have any meaning. But now obviously causality does have a meaning. So where does the meaning come from? And Hume says it comes from being accustomed to this view of things. I'm accustomed to seeing whenever I push something with my hand, then it starts rolling or falling off. When I'm accustomed to seeing the sun go up every morning, right? I see the sun go up every morning, therefore I think that it must do this tomorrow. But there's really no reason why it should do this tomorrow. There's no reason I can tell about because I never see such a reason. I only know it happens. It's rational to say that it happens. I'm not crazy if I expect the sun to go up tomorrow, but it is not something I can, as an empiricist, verify with my senses. So I have to believe in it. And so Hume says all kinds of beliefs we have about the world, they are only custom, right? We are accustomed to things happening. And this custom is what justifies our beliefs. There is no real justification for many of our beliefs when they involve things that we cannot see, that we cannot perceive. And in this way, also, Berkeley here goes a little away from this idea of language as being only about true and false, right, which Aristotelian logic suggests. And he says, no, we have lots of language where the point is not to be true or false, but the point is to be to have these other ends, other purposes, the raising of some passion here in the fourth line, the raising of some passion, exciting or deterring from an action, the putting the mind in some particular disposition to which the former is in many cases barely subservient, and so on. So these other purposes are important, right? These are the purposes that we use language for. And you have this kind of performative language. So when you say come here, you're telling somebody to come here. Or even, you can perform actions by language. If somebody asks you, do you want to buy this bicycle? And now I say yes. Then by saying yes, I'm actually closing a contract with this person to buy the bicycle. So you could construct, a legal situation in which a speech act is creating particular situation, marriage, right? You marry someone, the priest asks you, do you want to marry this person? And you say, yes, I want. And this yes, I want is your contract. It's the point at which now you have a contract, now you are married in the eyes of God, and so on. And this happens just by saying this sentence. So this is important, that language can have such functions. And also it's important often for explanations of morality. So when I ask, what does it mean that a particular action is morally right or morally wrong? You have these emotive theories of morality, which would say it just expresses an emotion. So when I say something is right or wrong, I cannot actually prove that it is right or wrong. It expresses my feeling of saying, oh, this is good, or oh, I don't like that, this is bad. So when I say, stealing is bad, in reality, I'm not saying you can prove factually that stealing is bad or logically or whatever. I'm only saying I don't like stealing, and therefore you shouldn't do it. And this would be this non-cognitive theory of language, non-cognitive theory of morality, where the statements of ethics are not statements that can be true or false, but they express a feeling. And this is what he says here. And so it's interesting that already back then he did this. And of course, obviously, this is also a thing for a priest. So much of what he does is explained by thinking of him as a man of God, right? Because particularly for a man of God, the way language functions is important, right? And if you are a priest, then you are not very happy, I guess, with saying that all language is propositions that are true or false. Because you have propositions, okay, obviously God exists, right? God exists, okay, but how do I prove it? He exists, he does not exist. But it's worse if you say something like, God is good. So now if you say God is good, what does it even mean that God is good? The word good, what does it mean? And the word God, what does it mean? God, if I have a theory of meaning, that depends on correspondence between my word and some expression that I can see, something outside, right, that I can see through my senses, like the empiricists say, then God doesn't mean anything because I don't perceive God with my senses normally. Perhaps, some mystics do, but normal people don't generally do that. So we cannot see God, we cannot perceive God. So if I'm an empiricist, what does God even mean? Does the word God have any meaning? Because it doesn't have a corresponding idea that I would have from the senses. And also, what does good mean? Because good means something for me as a human. I know how humans are good, but it cannot possibly mean the same for God. For example, why are we good? Sometimes we can say, we are good, or a human being is good because, why am I good? Sometimes I'm good because I hope that I will get something good in return, right? I'm nice to someone because I hope that they will reciprocate. Or I work hard in my office and I'm honest with my employer because I hope that they will keep me and pay me for this. Or I give money to a beggar because I hope that God will reward me in the future, right? So often what we do when we are good, we do it in the hope that it will be reciprocated or rewarded, right? And even if this is not the primary motivation, it is always an important part of it. But now, obviously, this does not apply to God, right? God does not do things because he hopes for a reward, because God is all-powerful. So according to the standard, way we think of God, the Christian way of thinking about God, there is no point for God to hope that we reciprocate or we do something good for him, because whatever God wants, he can just do it. He's all powerful. So why does he need us? He doesn't need us, right? Therefore, the goodness of God must be something different from our goodness. Also, we know that we are good, for example, because we have these mirror neurons. We have a biological basis for empathy. And when I do something, I can feel how the person to whom I'm doing that thing feels, right? This is what we call empathy, the ability to be inside the mind of another person. And so I do something good to you because I feel that this feels good to you, and I want you to feel good because it also makes me feel good. And again, this is not what God would be doing. God doesn't feel good in the same way like we do, because God doesn't have a body, for example. He doesn't have all these limitations. If you are an all-powerful spirit, then, you don't need things in order to feel good. So God doesn't have empathy in the same way that we have it. And his body doesn't work in the same way. His mind doesn't work in the same way. So saying God is good actually must mean something very different from what it means when I say Andy is good, right? And this is important to him. And I think this is what he wants to do here. He wants to alert us to the fact that when we say these sentences in prayer, for example, they are not meant to be propositions. They are not meant to be true or false. They are sometimes just meant to be, like prayers. We ask for something, or we thank for something, or we express our emotion for something, but we are not making a statement. And so all these critics who say that, God does not exist because of this or that, they are mistaken, because the whole language of talking about God is not a language which is based on truth values, right? On propositions being truth. True. So I think I gave you the basic idea of that, what Berkeley wants, how this is motivated by him being a man of God and trying to somehow restore God into our world. So thank you for being here, for watching this, and see you next time. Bye-bye.